I thought I would have some fun with doing a session on a specialty shot that I really like using in the right circumstance called the Contra Zoom. I think that's what it's called in the UK. It's also known as the Dolly Zoom, or more familiarly, the Jaws Zoom from the Roy Scheider shot, or a Vertigo Zoom. And this shot has a really strong visual impact, and it went out of style when it was overused in the 70s and early 80s. But I've used it quite a bit under different circumstances, once in the 90s on Touching Evil, and then more recently in Doctor Who on Heaven Sent, and much more recently on Riverdale and the Flash. I thought it might be a fun topic just to take a look at of where I used it, how effective it was, how difficult it was to use in different circumstances. I'm also going to use a clip from Supergirl where I did it and then didn't use it. So we have the gamut of yes and no and maybes. I'm going to start by showing you with a sample from this season of The Flash. And I was given this really fun episode where Cecile is trapped in her own mindscape of a mental institution. And my instructions from the showrunner were all the 80s horror tropes, which was music to my ears. So when Cecile has a horror epiphany, it seemed like a good time to go for it. And I was fully helped by the director of photography, Brenton Spencer, who was completely also embracing all the 80s horror tropes. So here's the example of how we used it.
Something's not right. Who are you? Are you trapped here too?
Barry, let's go!
Hey. We can help you. Something's not right. Who are you? Are you trapped here too?
Barry, let's go!
Hey. We can help you.
Here are some additional videos we did of the rehearsals. So it has a very dramatic look, and it works very well for this epiphany at this point. So I thought I'd go through a few examples of when I used it and how it worked. It's funny because on some sets, the camera operator is old hat and can whip it up in no time. In other circumstances, it turns out to be a big, complicated deal. It also depends on how much space you have, what equipment you have, how big your zoom lens is. So I'm going to talk about the technique for a little while, and some of you will know this inside out. So go ahead and skip forward where I talk about the specific examples. To understand the Dolly Zoom technique, you need a modicum of technical information, starting with an explanation of the difference between a dolly and zoom. So if you already know that stuff, again, just skip ahead. The zoom, which has been out of fashion for a long time. Why? Because when consumers got their hands on home video cameras, your grandma and your brother zoomed like crazy, and it became synonymous with bad camera operating. I love me a good zoom in the right place, and just take a look at Robert Altman's film MASH and tell me that those zooms aren't awesome. But yes, they can be overused, and yes, they can be cheesy. And also, many directors of photography really hate them, particularly because the acuity of the lens is not as good as a prime lens. So what is a zoom? Well, when you zoom, you change the focal length of the lens, meaning you're changing the lens size. So you might be zooming from an 18 millimeter lens, which is relatively wide, to a 100 millimeter lens, which is relatively close, or long lens. The longer the lens, the less depth of field you have, meaning how much depth is in focus. And if you're on a very long lens, that area in focus can be inches or less than an inch. And that's why you get those beautiful close-ups with beautiful bokeh, which is how I'm told to pronounce it, with beautiful lights bokehing in the background. And that's a much-loved look that has its trendy moments and its not trendy moments. I personally like it. I also recently have worked on a lot of shows where the cameraman wants to be close and wide. If you choose to shoot a close-up on a wide lens, you get a lot more background around the face, and more of it's in focus. This is all general because it all depends on how much light there is on the object and what lens and what make of lens. So I'm just giving you the simplest explanation. And most of you know what a zoom is anyway because it's on your, you do it on your iPhone. When you dolly, however, the lens stays the same, the focal length of the lens stays the same, and you're varying your distance from the object. So you're pushing in or pulling out. So you're physically moving the camera. It's as if you're walking closer on the same lens, not using a change in the lens. So dollying changes the spatial relationship to the surroundings of the subject. And if you think about it, our eyes are so amazing. You can look wide, you can look out and see very wide. You can also focus them into very tight, a very tight detail. So our eyes do this naturally, but what they don't do is act like a zoom lens, which is you don't see this movement from wide to tight. It's just your eye just makes that adjustment. So there's something particularly artificial about a zoom lens. A contra zoom is when you use both techniques, but you're doing them in the opposite direction, either dollying in and zooming out, or dollying out and zooming in. In a perfect contra zoom, the main image size stays the same, while the background changes around it. When you dolly out and zoom in theory, this creates a feeling of additional paranoia. But my experience has been that it's best and most fun to experiment with what works better for you, what works better for what you're trying to create, whether you dolly in and zoom out or dolly out and zoom in. So I tend to film the camera in both directions so I can see it in editing and make a choice what we're going to use. Let's take a look at an interesting contra zoom we did on Riverdale. This is where Jughead is hallucinating an alien outside his classroom window.
Billy has achieved true sight, or at least that's one interpretation. Mr. Jones?
This one was particularly challenging because outside the window was a hallway perpendicular to the window. So there wasn't a lot of room to do a long dolly shot, which really limited us to maybe 8 feet of dolly move, and that really limited our ability to get a strong effect. But somehow this was overcome by the fact that we were shooting through the window, which focused us very much on Jughead, and having the panes of glass really helped focus and accentuate the movement and the strangeness of the moment. Here are a couple of rehearsal attempts moving in both directions. Next, I want to show you our attempt to do this in the late 90s on Touching Evil. This is a strange one because I was aiming to make it clear that the Sean Dingwall character was in his own private hell. But this is a situation where lesser equipment made it difficult. So the key is to get the movements to work together, but we didn't have we had a very small zoom lens, which really wasn't big enough to get a big impact. And then the zoom motor wouldn't cooperate. And so we could never get the dolly and the zoom to happen effectively at the same speed. And so we never got a great effect. But somehow the fact that something is going wrong and something is a little odd is still imparted and has some impact. I'm now going to show you an example from Supergirl. In this case, we shot the effect very effectively. And I don't have the dailies because they don't give me that material. But we had a really big space, we had a big zoom lens, and it was a big moment for Kyler. And when we edited it together, it was just way too prominent and too big a deal. So I looked at it and we were like, this is just stuff for stuff's sake. And a simple push-in was enough.
Colonel Haley. I'm so sorry, Director Danvers.
You had me fooled, Danvers. I thought you were a soldier, but then I find this out. All the lies you must have told. You have undermined everything that we stand for. All to protect your own sister, Supergirl.
For Doctor Who fans of Heaven Sent, this is the big Peter Capaldi Dr. Epiphany moment. And I was afraid that the generic nature of the background might not be effective for the Contra Zoom.
It's platinum. 400 times harder than diamond. 20 feet thick. The way
one thing I like is that we have some regular movement before we start the effect. So it's not this cut, big effect, cut away. I hadn't done that before, and it really seemed to make the effect more of a surprise and more integrated. So here are some choices and varieties and different levels of success, and it's definitely a type of shot that is cool, but only under the right circumstances, and I'd love to hear your feedback.